Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Williamsburg City Council meeting of April 7th. Ms. McKay, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Williams? Here. Ms. Ramsey?
Here.
Mayor Pons?
Here.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Here.
Ms. Kernshire? Here.
Okay. Next on the agenda is council preview for next week. Drew?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. We'll start the meeting off with the presentation of the Excellence in Service Award to Micah Lewis. Then under public hearings, we have 4 budget-related public hearings. And then the unfinished business, we do have the approval of the PPA interim agreement with Horgan for the library project. Under new business, we have a refunding agreement for bonds previously issued by the city. Then we have the appointment of the Poet Laureate and a authorization to execute the performance agreement for the Ampersand International Arts Festival. And then we did have an item on the agenda for reclamation of the lagoons at the water treatment plant. Unfortunately, the bids came in much higher than we have budgeted, so we're going to have to look at that and come up with a new strategy. So that will not be on the agenda. We do have a budget amendment to recognize some grant funding and then appointments to boards and commissions.
Good. Any questions for the city manager? All right, takes us now to public comments, and I do have a number of speakers cards, but if I call your name and you wish to wait till the open forum, just say, I'll wait, and we'll move on. The first card I have is Mr. Robert Wilson.
Good afternoon. My name's Robert Wilson. I live at 22 The Palisades. The proposed fiscal year 26 budget is only the latest instance of mismanagement by the city of Williamsburg and the latest in a series of missteps and blunders. For me, it starts with Spotswood, the proposed development by CW on the former Spotswood Golf Course on South England Street. CW submitted a rezoning proposal that doubled the density of the property to 162 residential units. It was later revealed that city leaders and many city's council members had met with the CEO of CW over breakfast or lunch at the Williamsburg Inn up to a year in advance of their rezoning proposal and did not disclose this information. Subsequently, the city entered into a purchase agreement with a developer to develop city-owned property into a high-density townhouse development called Landmark Village. This property had previously been acquired by the city to prevent its development in the fragile Lake Matoka watershed. 3 days after the city's involvement in developing the letter of intent was made public, the developer withdrew its rezoning application from the city council agenda and canceled it. However, 1 year later, the city has still not disclosed why the purchase agreement itself has not been canceled by the city. Then there's the botched effort to separate from the joint school system with James City County. Now, after the city announced they would remain in the joint school system, a new contract is proving difficult to negotiate as the JCC is using the city's own words against them. Meanwhile, over the past 2 years, city students are no better off when residents are now faced with millions of dollars of increased spending. Last year, I pointed out that to the city that its water infrastructure was crumbling due to benign neglect, that its growth strategies promised to outstrip the city's current water supply, and that due to inattention, the $12.5 million payment to Newport News had escalated to $18.5 million in order to retain the second of 1 million gallons of water per day water supply from Newport News. Now, suddenly in this budget, the city wants to invest $27.5 million over the next 10 years to rehab the filtration plant and sedimentation bases, add another storage tank, and replace and rehab its water and sewer distribution system. These improvements are needed because the filtration plant has fallen well below its designed capacity to process drinking water. Peak daily demand is near its current daily storage capacity, and the water lines lose over 170 million gallons a year, or 16% of the water withdrawn from the reservoir through leaks and evaporation. And now the city wants city residents and businesses to pay 30% more next year and triple the rate for water over the next 10 years to repay the $27.5 million it proposes to borrow instead of cutting costs and paying for the upgrades out of our taxes in the general fund. There's the issue of the city council appointing the city manager to the board of the Historic Triangle Recreation Facilities Authority, where as chairperson, in my opinion, he is conflicted in his fidelity and faithful duty to the city and his fidelity and duty to the HTRFA. Given all the issues within the city, it would seem proper for the city council to allow the city manager to focus on city matters and replace him on the HTRFA board. So that brings us to the current budget concerns. Despite the tremendous increase in city revenues due to increase in property taxes, these monies were not spent on major projects, but on increasing the cost of governmental activities. The major projects have largely been funded by debt or borrowing by the city. At the end of 2022, the city debt was $18 million, or about $2,600 per non-student resident of the city. The current budget proposes debt at the end of fiscal year 2025 at $48.7 million. The city now proposes borrowing another $33.6 million this year for the library, the Peacock Hill Children's Park, and the first installment of the water system upgrades. After principal payments, it's estimated the city debt at the end of fiscal 26 will be $79 million, or about $11,000 per non-student resident, with another $21 million in utility upgrade borrowings over the next 10 years. The Historic Triangle Recreation Facilities Authority has a debt of $64 million, and all the city has provided its moral obligation, its legal obligation is limited to $2.5 million. Finally, what I'm most incensed about is the recent actions by the city to silence resident oppositions to its plans, threatening litigation against our neighbors for yard signs protesting the city's plan to increase density downtown and build an elaborate children's park on CW pasture land is a chilling violation of our free speech rights. Everybody knows these signs were a visual manifestation of that political campaign. Yet you chose to target them in a mean exercise of power. And it's so hypocritical of members of the city council who you yourselves displayed similar yard signs in your own political campaigns. And as all the matters I've discussed above, the city council sits like potted plants in quiet acquiescence of these actions by the city. I, like others, are starting to voice concerns about the direction of the city and the possible need for a change in city leadership. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker's card I have is Rosemary Friend. You just state your name and address for the record, and please keep your comments to 5 minutes. Welcome, Ms. Friend.
My name is Rosemary Friend. I live at 322 Scotland Street, Williamsburg. I'm 84 years old and frustrated. My husband's family has owned my property since 1925. The proposed children's park would be on the CW property next to me and would be a disaster for my last senior years and my property. Colonial Williamsburg has placed the best introduction and welcome to our historical town with a tranquil pasture and grazing horses and oxen on that land. Why destroy this unique and perfect setting? The proposed park will bring unbearable noise, more traffic on a busy street, constant upkeep, and continual lawsuits. There is a potential for high crime at night in that area. Poor planning by the city hurts the town and the residents. People who invest in a home want to live in peace and tranquility. We don't want a Disneyburg. We want our Williamsburg. Our votes, with our votes, the citizens and taxpayer of Williamsburg have given City Council our trust and confidence in hopes that you would listen to our concerns about the city we love. Unfortunately, human values have changed over the years. The commissions and boards have their own ideas, sometimes disrespectful of the taxpayers and their concerns about our town. Council members, I believe, are familiar with the city goals, but need a little gentle reminder from those you serve. This information is for the citizens and the taxpayers of Williamsburg who have never heard the city goals to determine if our city council and boards and commissions are practicing these ideals. These core values are taken from the Policy and Procedures Manual, Section 701 Personal Manual, Code of Ethics. The city adopts the cores and ethical standards drafted by a representative committee of employees in 2008 as a code of ethics for the city of Williamsburg. The code of ethics shall apply to all active employees of the city and such city boards and commissions who adopt them. City cores. 1, integrity. We shall act with honor and courage, honesty and sincerity, so as to inspire public trust and confidence in our city government. Caring. We shall pursue passionately the well-being of the people and community we serve as good stewards of a self-governing and democratic society. Accountability. We shall accept responsibility for our actions and decisions, pursuing excellence in our work. Respect. We shall treat all with dignity, courtesy, and tolerance as we would wish to be treated, even when others act without the same consideration. 5, equity. We shall promote fairness and openness, opposing favoritism or prejudice, in providing city services and governmental processes. When you make a final decision that affects the life and the future of an individual or a community, there should be one more core value added to the list of 5. It is a profound wisdom and an ethical standards which the physicians have used for centuries. First, do no harm.
Thank you, Ms. Friend. Next speaker's card I have is Ms. Nancy Bolash.
Hello, I'm Nancy Bolash, 327 Burns. Part of running a well-run and viable jurisdiction is the ability to react to current and future conditions. You've heard me speak most recently about the inadvisability of investing $6 million for a children's playground impinging on the historic area, when the adjoining larger and wealthier jurisdiction of James City County is considering spending just $265,000 for a playground by their library. More frequently, you've heard me advocate for help for the downtown historic neighborhoods through monetary support, ordinance enforcement, and heightened expectations for William and Mary. But I recognize when conditions become dire. That is the case now, where the communication submitted by the city manager is out of step. The financial turmoil on the national and international level is likely to directly impact and undermine any real income to be realized from attending events, eating out, or traveling. We cannot and should not count on the increased revenue source to fund any ideas. I suggest that we halt any immediate spending outside of our core functions until we can take stock of repercussions for our future. It will give us a chance to evaluate the advisability of greatly taking on more debt at this juncture without a clear and solid underpinning of real revenue. It will allow us to prioritize what must be done and what is merely a pipe dream in light of disturbing current events. Please stop and don't rush into any more, either for revenue or for projects, without being thoughtful about the world beyond Williamsburg. Our good name and viability of our city depend on your actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bolash. Next speaker's card I have is Chuck Keating. Welcome, sir. Just state your name and address for the record, and please keep your comments to about 5 minutes.
Okay, my name is Chuck Keating. I live at 321 North Henry Street, just adjacent to the Colonial Williamsburg area. I've got three things that I wanted to talk about on the budget for your consideration. The first, I won't beat the drum too much louder, proposed children's park. Who can argue against a children's park? It's like attacking dogs. The point I want to make is that it is not, and I've seen some people couch it as a generational issue. I'd argue it's not. It's how we think about the colonial area and protection of the entryway of that. Down North Henry Street is the first entry into the colonial area. Right, so I took a look at there. I found 10 comparable areas with a historical mission similar to Colonial Williamsburg. Of that, there's only one, that's Old Sturbridge in Massachusetts, that has a small respite area for children. It's completely out and it's discreet. It's away from the historical area as far as the sight lines and what it does as far as disruption for the colonial area there. The second point I wanted to make is that irrespective of the children's park, $6.5 million, as we've heard somebody else say, is excessive. That is over 5% of the city budget allocated to one park. And when I looked at that and from the conceptual drawings, where most places I think are several hundred square feet, 44,000. So with the current finances and the condition of the city finances, I find that $6.5 million is somewhat massively excessive. I would be surprised if Colonial Williamsburg would permit the encroachments into the historical area, that the zoning changes would be approved by the Planning Commission, and that the ARB would approve such a concept as what was presented for the citizens to look at. Changing subject, my second point of reflection, I also saw in the budget, I took a look, there were $5.5 million reprogrammed from COVID money that was allocated to affordable housing. Almost every meeting we go to, we hear the drumbeat of affordable housing. $5.5 million reprogrammed into improvement projects without any direction of exactly where it's going. I find that somewhat disingenuous in the budget. The third point, I'm not the big fan of not taxing people who come to visit our area from out of town. Right? I understand that logic. I'm not a big defender of Colonial Williamsburg. I don't work for them. I live down the street from them. I appreciate what they do and how they do it. They're not on the best of financial times. They're on tight budgets like everyone else. When I look at trying to put a 10% admissions tax on everybody buying a ticket, you've automatically taken their business model and you've turned it upside down. You said your business to run for admission into your park now is going to be increased 10%, and you're not seeing any of that. So I find that somewhat, for me, disturbing that Colonial Williamsburg is one of our primary anchors in this community, that'd be hoist on them. I also saw that was projected with that, the meal and the lodging tax, to produce $4.2 million additional revenue for the city. I compare that against $6.5 million for a children's park and $5.5 million reallocated away from affordable housing. And it seems that I would suggest that as you consider the budget priorities for the city, that we think about realigning some of those. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Keating. Next speaker's card I have is Dr. David Cranbuell.
David Cranbuell. Granville, 201 Harrison. I can be a little more upbeat because there's something that we can do that's positive, and all the things I've heard are people who aren't very happy. Well, my major point, and I've written each of you quite a letter, and I spent an hour and a half with somebody I highly respect, so do several of you, Bob Singley, on Friday afternoon. And we're very, very worried about the debt. And we're very, very proud of a tax rate we have of 0.62. And we know that that rate is inflation adjusted. So anything going over it, it means we're spending more than our income. And we're taxing property owners. Now, on top of that is something that's extremely serious. I want every one of you, and I'd like the city manager to fund it, it's trivial, to get a subscription to the Wall Street Journal. We're heading into an economic war, and I'm sure some of you know it. And it's getting worse with every day with what the recent response was today to the Chinese. It's war. It's economic war, and you need to really understand economics, the difference between the interest rate on a Treasury bill and a 10-month Treasury bond. You need to understand all kinds of things because they're all tied to interest rates in the future. So, you've gotten a rather stiff letter from the last previous mayor who did a superb job while he was here. My simple point is that we need to separate expenditures, which I totally support, particularly the schools, which, by the way, have hardly gotten any increase over 10 years compared to everything else. And we can support all the other things that are services that we have. Those are expenditures. Expenses, I'm sorry, I misspoke, expenses. But when it comes to expenditures for new projects, we need to do what every single family in this United States is doing right now, tightening up, living within their current year's income, and maybe preparing for income that's going to be less. I think the odds of us having anything close to our current level of income in the next year or two are at best 50-50. We need to be prepared for a significant shock, even if we make these increases in taxes on outsiders, so to speak, but I eat out every weekend, so my meal tax will now be 15%, one of the highest in the country. But I don't mind paying it, trust me. But what I don't like is fiscal poor planning. So I'm asking you to look at this budget and come to grips with the fact that right here in today's paper, tariffs erase economy's solid outlook. Next line, recession likelihood soars as uncertainty on, I don't even want to use his name, course weighs on markets. And so what I'm asking you to do is to put a freeze, and it's already been suggested by others, on every single thing. You do not write a check, you do not sign an agreement for future expenses, and most important of all, for future debt. Now, I'm not against these things, but I'm against moving forward with sort of a total blindness to what we're facing. It's deadly serious. Everybody who has a retirement income, I don't, mine's fine. But everybody who works, everybody who has a spouse, they could be laid off. All you have to do is read this newspaper and read about all these companies that continue to lay off people. So we need to just put a total moratorium on not signing anything unless we're canceling it. I'll give you a couple examples. I happen to have invested in Delta Airlines way back when we had the pandemic because I assumed it would go up, and it did. It's the only smart decision I did. I should have sold everything in my 401, as my financial advisor said a month ago. I would have saved lots of money. All right, I did sell it. It has dropped 30% in 2 weeks. What does that mean? That means that the financial community and the industry and all those investment advisors thinks that airplane travel is going to go way down. That's just one example. Here's another example. A major restaurateur person, and then I'll stop because there's lots of examples, said recently that he sees people sharing a meal where they used to pay for 2 meals and take a lot of food home. This is what's happening, and I see it when I go out to eat. The restaurants are not packed, and we're headed for a high probability of a really serious decrease in income, even with these tax increases.
Mr.
Thank you.
Grimm, your 5 minutes exceeded. Thank you, sir. Next speaker's card I have is Richard Lampert. Welcome, sir.
Hello. Richard Brigham Lampert, 349 Scotland Street. I go by Brig. I've spoken to you all before, communicated with you all before. Certainly, you all, based on the economic war just described, are going to hear a lot from a lot of people in the coming weeks, so I'm not going to belabor it. I'm going to keep it short. What I would like to do is to publicly thank Mayor Pons. I'm assuming the rest of council is aware of this, but perhaps not. Mayor Pons took time out of his evening schedule last week to meet with the residents of Peacock Hill as a group at one of our homes. And while the issue of the Children's Park was not settled to our satisfaction, certainly it was illuminating and clarifying on certain counts. I do hope, Mayor Pons, that you came away from the meeting with the sense that we are not against growth and vibrancy just sort of as a general curmudgeonly policy. Certainly, I personally am not against it because I know that all boats rise together. For example, the new signage that's going in all over downtown. It's bigger, it's louder, but that's okay. Brighter signage is not necessarily a bad thing. Hopefully, it helps the tourism budget. Restaurant Row, as was described to me by Ms. Griffin and Ms. Matsumoto. The devil's in the details, obviously, but on its face, that doesn't sound like a bad thing. I'm certainly not going to complain about more options to eat, especially if it involves no new construction, just reusing what is already there. What did you call it? The entertainment venue, Mayor Pons, that you brought up at our meeting, as was described to us, the Peacock Hill residents, it's essentially like over by the sports center, an amphitheater about the size of the amphitheater that they have on Mud Island, if you've been to Memphis. That's pretty cool, especially because of its location over there. I can get behind that. That's going to bring in some tourists, assumedly, and some decently sized acts, and combined with the hotel and the dining taxes that Mayor Trevette is, or Mr. Trevette is proposing, I mean, that's going to help to fill the city's coffers. So it's not that we're being curmudgeonly just for the sake of being curmudgeonly. It's this particular thing. It's this thing. It's this particular project in that particular location. And the reason why this children's park has galvanized and mobilized our neighborhood is that what happens to that pasture impacts those of us who live on the intersection of Scotland and Henry Street. It will impact us 24/7, 365. And that's why we are fully against it. So again, I do hope that you came away with the impression that we're not just being curmudgeonly, for lack of a better word. It's this specific thing. And if the project didn't exist, I almost certainly would not be here talking with you at this moment. It's that thing. That being said, again, thank you. That was my primary purpose in speaking, but I also want to extend an invitation to the rest of the four of you. If you would so like, I am certain that we would be happy to host you at one of our homes and discuss with you all this particular project as well. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lampert. Next speaker's card I have is Ms. Carolyn Murphy. Welcome back to Stryker.
Mayor Pons and members of council, I'm Carolyn Murphy. I live at 221 Yorkshire Drive. I want to talk today about the following items since we're limited to 5 minutes. First is the children's park. I want to express my opposition to the proposed park on Peacock Hill for the following reasons. The proposed property is located in the CW Historic District, which does not allow a public park. The statement of intent for that district says this district is established to preserve, protect, and maintain the unique character and historic importance of the Colonial Williamsburg historic area. So how does this project meet that statement? The comprehensive plan designates this area as CW Historic District and does not support a rezoning of the property. The comp plan states this district encompasses the Colonial Williamsburg historic area and is established to preserve, protect, and maintain the restored area's distinctive character and historic importance. The city's design review guidelines do not support a building enclosure for a merry-go-round that replicates the Powder magazine. Therefore, I believe a public park is not appropriate in the historic district or area, and the location should be eliminated immediately. Now to the money being spent for the proposed park. I oppose the city going further in debt by borrowing $6.5 million for a new park. How do we go from $6 million in grants and donations in last year's budget to the city borrowing $6.5 million for a park? Where are the grants and donations and what are the continual maintenance costs? Why add a 13th park when we have 12 others that need a considerable amount of upkeep and upgrading per the 2019 recreation study? Considering the attendance of residents in the city to these other 12 parks as noted in that study, we don't need to construct a new park. Let's properly maintain the 12 we currently own. The library. James City County and York's budgets do not indicate they are contributing to the downtown library. James City County's budget indicates a new library being constructed with their new county complex. If a new library is constructed at this location, then the downtown library needs to be considerably smaller. The library board must know what funding and any potential participation from our partners at this stage of the game. What happens to the 300% overcapacity if a new facility is built within the new county complex, which is just outside the city limits? This is incredibly important before we have public meetings to determine the size and cost of our downtown library. Again, let's build what is needed and not a want. Surely with a new library, the downtown library will not be over 300% capacity since the county users are a major portion of the usage of the downtown library. It's time for city staff and the council to do some real budgeting by making a sincere effort to separate needs from wants. As a citizen, I'm not willing to pay for wants when so much is being proposed for schools, new buildings, millions of dollars to upgrade our water and sewer and stormwater facilities. You need to be fiscally responsible and not strap the city with so much debt. Stop talking about the low tax rate and look at the number of taxable properties, which is 4,333, and taxpayers who are far fewer than that number, who pay a significant amount of general budget with the increased value of our homes and businesses over the past 10 years. Yes, we have been paying a lot more taxes over the last 10 years, and yes, the tax rate has gone up. However, the city keeps spending all that money, the ARPA money, borrowing money, going into debt, and all you hear is we have the lowest tax rate. Enough already. We, our citizens, are not willing to keep spending money like it grows on trees. We must budget our households, and the city needs to learn to do the same, and you should start with this year's budget. For example, I looked at 26 departments' budgets under the city manager last year, and 19 of those budgets were more than 5% over budget. What's surprising is that the two departments that understand the importance of staying within a budget are the two that exceed the most, which are the city managers and finances, with over 40% being over. How does this happen? What good is the budget process when departments are not held within their budget and the council does not keep the manager in line with the budget? How does one department spend over $62,000 in 1 year on travel? How does that department budget $300,000 this year and is estimated to spend $40,000, $30,000, and $40,000 or more this year? Department budgets, including travel budgets, need to be looked at carefully, and travel needs to be reduced considerably. Consider going outside the country for a potential award for staff and council needs to stop.
Ms.
And
Murphy.
since my time has expired, I'll be back on Thursday to read the rest.
Thank you, ma'am. Would anybody else like to come forward? Welcome, Mr. Lane. Just state your name and address for the record, please.
I'm Robert Lane, 248 Yorkshire Drive. I'm just going to say ditto to Carolyn and to Clyde. Their experience and understanding of what is right for Williamsburg is equal to, and in some instances exceeds, mine and yours. And I can't say what they have said any better. Thank you.
There will be an open forum at the end of the meeting if anybody changes their mind and wants to come back. But with that, we'll move on to background presentations and discussions. And first and only is a presentation and discussion concerning the FY26 City Manager's proposed budget. Mr. Trivett?
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
Stammer.
So today, we're going to go through the 26 budget. We'll do an overview of it here. So this is the budget process. We begin really in December and start working on reviewing departmental requests and matching that to revenues. We're now in April, and the city charter says it will adopt the budget in May, and so that's the journey that we're on. So I thought I'd start with just what is a budget, because I think a lot of folks get confused. A budget is a plan. It's not a contract. It's not a guarantee of spending. Most of the projects that are in the budget, particularly in the CIP, have such a value they have to come back to City Council for future approvals. And so it's important that we try to budget for the things that we know on the horizon, so that when it comes time to spend the money, it's actually something that we have planned for. It's a statement of goals that can become the reality, as I said, but not necessarily a certainty. And then, of course, just as I said, because it's included in the budget does not mean necessarily that the council will proceed with it. This proposed budget is $112.3 million over 6 funds. And those 6 funds are important to understanding how the money actually operates. The general fund is the fund where most of the departmental activities are budgeted, and that's at $15.1 million for the coming year. The Capital Improvement Projects Fund is its own fund, and that is $39.6 million. Now, the Capital Improvement Projects Fund, I'm going to talk about in a minute in a little bit more detail, but that's where the city budgets for major expenses. Not just construction projects, but that is a part of it. Also, programs, plans, acquisitions, even vehicles are all funded in that same way. If it has a particular lifespan and a particular cost, then it's budgeted for in the capital plan. Utility fund is different than all the rest. It's an enterprise fund. It's designed to stand on its own revenues. That's where we budget all of the utility costs for the utility system. The tourism fund is our newest fund. That was created to create better transparency on how we're spending tourism-related dollars. And so all of the tourism funding goes through that and funds those various activities. The Public Assistance Fund is related to the Human Services Department, and then the Quarter Path CDA is the small fund that operates the exchange of tax revenues with the CDA out at the Quarter Path Development. So what's new in this budget? And it's not a whole lot, really. We anticipated, as we began to do our forecasting, that we would generate about $2.4 million in new revenue. That's from the existing tax rates and the expected increase in assessed values, which I'll talk about in a minute. And the first thing that we do is we match those expected increased revenues to mandatory spending, existing contracts, personnel costs, those kinds of things inherent in the budget. And when we did that, we really only had about $77,000 left outside of that organic revenue growth. And so considering any new requests from departments really wasn't something that we could afford to do. The only new request that's in this budget is a 3% cost of living adjustment for the staff. All the rest are mandatory increases resulting from our existing agreements and service cost increases. So what's not included? It's a pretty decent list. We have dealt effectively with many of the departmental needs related to programming and whatnot. What we've not done a good job of is addressing what they perceive to be as their staffing needs. And so there's a whole host of staffing requests that came forward this year. Unfortunately, we weren't able to include any of them in the proposed budget. The one exception are 2 positions in the utility department, an engineer and a fats, oils, and grease inspector. Those are the only 2 new positions in the budget. And as I said before, those are funded completely out of the utility fund and the revenues associated with the rates. As some of the speakers have said, one of the other things that we've not been able to include is something the City Council wanted to do, which was to wean ourselves off of federal funding associated with WRHA. And I would say that as you consider what funding we get from the federal government is most vulnerable to federal policy changes, that seems to be very susceptible at the moment. But that's not included in this budget. The new outside agency request, every year we open that process through a grant system, and we did receive a whole host of new requests. None of those were funded in this budget. And then, of course, at the point we are in budget adoption, where there's a whole host of things that we still don't know. We don't know the actual health department cost. Joint activities with James City County are still undetermined because they've not adopted their budget. And, of course, where we will land with school funding remains to be seen. And then, as I said before, the state budget has not been adopted either, and of course, federal funding and how that might change what funding we get. Real estate assessments. We're not recommending a change in the real estate rate, but that doesn't mean that the assessed values have not gone up. Part of that organic growth that's forecasted is based on an average of 4% in the real estate values. As you can see there, the trend upward, although that growth trend has slowed considerably as federal money policy has affected mortgage rates. So how does that impact our local residents? There are two ways people pay the property tax. Either they have a mortgage or they don't have a mortgage. If you have a mortgage, you're paying it monthly as associated. You're typically paying it monthly as part of that mortgage payment and an escrow. And if you don't have a mortgage, you're paying it biannually through the city tax bills. As you can see here, the spread of how that 4% actually impacts what you're paying, the impact is generally very low. As we talk about the budget generally, and this is what I said in the budget letter to the residents, there are two major things that we have been wrestling with now for years as we put together every single budget. The first is the need to address infrastructure upgrades with the utility system. For years, we have been talking about the fact that we were going to need to address the rate and accomplish some major investments. You can break those investments down into three categories: the manufacturing of the water, the distribution of the water, and the pump stations that circulate the water. We would like to start on the manufacturing side and deal with the issues that we know exist at the water treatment plant. There's not an immediate threat to the city's water system, but it is old, and we've not done a very good job of keeping up with general maintenance. It's time to do some pretty substantial upgrades to not only the hardware and software that runs the plant, but also the physical structure. If you total all of those together, it's a $27.6 million investment planned to occur over 10 years. Now, what we would like to do is raise the rate to accomplish that over time. The CIP structural imbalance is another big factor. The CIP in the city of Williamsburg is somewhat uniquely designed to be funded through sales tax revenues. But of course, sales tax revenue alone sometimes is not enough to meet the need. And so typically what happens is, as budgets occur, there's a surplus in the general fund. That's been historic. And that surplus flows through the general fund into the CIP to help create the money required for those expensive years. Over the last few years, the City Council has asked us to be more precise in the budgeting process. And that has really reduced the amount of surplus available. And so as we move into future years, we've got to deal with the lack of surplus to overcome those deficiencies. In FY22, I proposed a property tax increase to deal with this, and we did not approve it in full. Instead, we used some COVID relief funds to create a stabilization pool in the CIP that would postpone that action. And now we have exhausted those stabilization funds, and we need to again consider revenues associated with the CIP. So how do we meet these two challenges? We proposed a series of 3 different strategies that all have different actions. The first is constrained spending. So I went through the CIP at the early part of the budget and began to look at projects that I considered to be not essential. And so for the FY26 operating year, I cut $15.3 million worth of projects. Many of those projects were proposed projects for this coming fiscal year, but a lot of them were also projects that had been previously funded and either planned to start in the current fiscal year or even other earlier fiscal years and not yet completed. And so we took some funding out of those pre-approved projects as well. And then an additional $15 million that's not shown on the slide here from future years of the CIP to try and achieve some balance. What's remaining in the CIP is largely your GIO projects and other projects that I know are important to City Council. So we'll talk about in a minute how you should consider that as you review this budget. In addition, I went through the city's departmental operating budget, and I looked at FY25, FY24, and FY23 spending patterns for the discretionary lines in each department and made a series of reductions that totaled $725,000. I talked it over with each department head, and while this does reduce what they have available to spend on some things, I think we'll be able to meet the target during the year. In addition to that, I froze 9 positions that are currently vacant through the end of this fiscal year. That's the hope. If the City Council does not approve the funding plan that you have before you, then we'll have to consider that funding freeze to extend even further and may even have to expand it to other positions. We also considered the one-time funds that the city has available. So the City Council has previously designated $5.5 million for various projects that we received during COVID. We have made that available in the budget to offset expenses. The same thing is true with $1 million of the reserve fund, which exceeds the city's reserve policy. Making those available, the function of that is at the end of the year, we would use those funds to balance where necessary. Ideally, we go through the year and revenues perform better than we expect, expenses are less than we expect, and we don't need nearly as much of this money as we were programming. In addition to that, we have to consider improved revenue. As I said, we want to consider adjusting the water rate to increase it $1.59 per 1,000 gallons. That would help us meet the needs of the water utility. That is not intended to offset the cost of general government or the CIP. That is strictly for the utility fund. For dealing with the CIP, we would like to increase the excise taxes, 2% on the mills tax and 3% on the lodging tax, and institute an admissions tax of 10%. That's our recommendation. Now, as I said, when you look at these proposals, you can adjust any of these numbers up or down, certainly. What I would suggest is that as you consider adjusting the rates, particularly on the improved revenue side, the thing that you need to do is look particularly at the capital improvement plan and identify projects, expenses that you think can either be postponed, but even more ideally, be removed from the plan to create the latitude to lower those rates. So what's an admissions tax? This is a new tax for the city. It's not a new tax for the state. Admissions tax has been around for a long time. The city of Williamsburg is one of the few cities in the state that doesn't already have one. Most cities that have it have a 10% collection rate. Admissions tax is applied to the price of admission to an event. So if an event sells a ticket, the tax is applied. It's not paid by the organization hosting the event, it's paid by the patron. So it works like all of the other excise taxes. As a ticket buyer, I'm paying that additional tax, and then it's remitted by the organization to the city. The tax is applied to the ticket sold. The tax does not apply to university-sponsored events. If you read the state code on admissions, that's not what it says, but there was a later Attorney General's opinion that said that the cities in the state cannot tax the state as an entity, and so that means university-sponsored events would be exempt. And the council has pretty much ultimate latitude with the implementation of the admissions tax. You can impose it on some classes of organizations and not others. Of course, you can reduce the rate like you can with any tax, but you can also implement a cap on the taxed amount if you choose to. Let's talk a little bit about the utility system and the proposed rate increase. This is a chart that shows you the rate increases over time. So since 2000, we've really had a history of small incremental increases in the rate every year. In 2017, that stopped, and we did not propose any future increases in the rate, which is one of the reasons why we're now recommending a jump of 30% in the rate. Had we kept up with sort of that incremental increase over time, we would actually be well above what the staff is recommending for the rate. So yes, what we are asking is that for FY26, we adopt the rate as presented, and then of course we will revisit the rate in future years. At the finance retreat, we did talk about a number of 10%. That's a not to exceed number. It's very likely that that number would be much less than that, particularly considering that what we're trying to finance is a 10-year work plan that largely depends on staff's ability to implement and complete the projects, which will probably slow us down over time, which would slow down the rate of the growth, or the rate growth. So what does that mean to the user? We looked at some historical data, and the average residential utility bill would increase $6.36 per month. And then on the commercial side, we used a median to determine a 28.62 per month increase. The reason we use the median is because many of the commercial users pay the minimum rate, and then we do have some very high users at the top of the rate that make it very difficult to use the average. Looking at the regional utility rates, even with this increase, we still offer probably the best bargain in terms of a full-service water utility in the region. So let's talk about the CIP. As we talked about the balancing of the CIP, these two charts show you where we started after forecasting the organic revenue growth of $2.4 million and paying the mandatory expenses of the general fund. We're able to balance with sales tax the governmental projects that are planned. So that's what you see in the blue chart. When you factor in the education projects and the required reserves of the fund, that's when we don't have enough money to balance. And so we need to begin looking for either reducing projects or increasing revenue, or the combination of the two. So we began to look at possible solutions. This is not the entire list of solutions that we considered. Certainly we considered a whole host of things, including a 20% reduction to the city government as a whole. But we did look at some other improved revenue streams, and I wanted to show them today because we did look at an increase in the real estate rate. As I showed on an earlier slide but didn't point out, raising the penny in the city this coming year generates about $329,000 in new revenue. So it's not a strong revenue source in terms of increasing to meet needs. Also is the possibility of implementing a trash and recycling fee. We're one of the few cities in the state that don't have that. We could pass that cost of service on to the residents and save the city's budget about $1.3 million by doing that. But again, that's something that historically the city has not wanted to do. So we began to look at a more fair and appropriate way, in my opinion, of accomplishing revenue growth, and that's by increasing the excise taxes for meals, lodging, and admissions. The reasons are really simple. I think that A, it's the easiest way to generate the revenue that we need because of the volume of the tax, but also I think it's the fairest approach because it spreads the cost of running city government to all of the users of city government. Only applying the tax to real estate tax means only those small subset of property owners are providing that revenue. So when we make those adjustments and apply that, what you see is even including the education projects and reserves, we're able to balance the FY26 CIP with a $273,000 surplus at the end of the fiscal year. That's not a tremendous margin of error, but it does give us a little bit of room to maneuver if some of these revenues don't materialize the way that we expect them to. But probably the best news is that over time it balances the problem long term, which is of course our focus. As you can look at that, we begin to build a balance in the fund and spin that down over time, particularly as we get to FY30. Now of course, as you look forward, you can consider all the possible changes that might occur in the economy, both locally and at the federal level, and it's hard to forecast them. So what we did is we said we looked at FY27, 28, 29, and 30, assuming the same level of revenue growth as this year, which is fairly low compared to past years, and applied that along with these strategies to see if it actually met the needs. And the good news is that it does. The bad news is that the excise taxes are incredibly subject to consumer confidence, and so that's something that we would definitely need to consider moving forward. So where do we go from here? Again, we are in April, so we're presenting the budget tonight. We'll talk about the budget again at the meeting on Thursday with the public hearings, and then the city charter does ask that the city council adopt the budget in May. We'll have the budget back on the agenda at the work session to present any changes since tonight. So if the city council asks for changes in the CIP, revisions to the general fund, or what have you, we'll be able to present those and the impacts to the budget then. So the opportunities for the public to come and speak to the city council again at the April 10th regular meeting during the public hearings, the May 5th work session just like tonight, and then again, hopefully just prior to adoption at the regular meeting on May the 8th. Happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Trivett, and thank you, Barbara, for all the work that you've done to go through all the line items in the city and ultimately prepare a budget for our consideration. I think I think it's not the best outlook. There's, as we've heard from our audience, we've got lots of things constraining us well beyond our control. Some are more optimistic than others, but that I am reminded when I was the treasurer at the Tourism Council and some of the analysis that they're seeing from tourism experts are predicting yet still an increase of 2.8%. And so seeing some growth in revenue in our own budget is in line with what we're hearing from other organizations. Now, it's changing every day. A week ago, J.P. Morgan wasn't predicting a 60% chance of a recession. Today they are. But with that said, understanding the constraints, I applaud you all, all the staff, for coming forward with the suggestion that we cut the $15.3 million from the CIP, but then also going in and looking at the operational budget and finding about 2% cut. It's not always easy. I've spent time going through line by line, and sure, I may say we don't need that many shovels, but shovels get the work done, and so how do you make that cut? So I appreciate you all have gone through and done that, and then again with the $207,000 in holding some positions, which is, I think it's a wise step, but when we hold positions open, work still needs to be done, and we rely on our existing employees to get that work done. So workloads increase, that starts to wear on employee morale, which then leads me to think about the 3% cost of living that you've included in this budget, because we don't want our pay scales to get out of whack. I'm reminded a number of years ago, one of the concerns that we were faced with was people were leaving the city to go work in our neighboring jurisdictions. I can't fault them for that, but part of the reason was the paying class schedule was way off, and we found ourselves below what our neighboring jurisdictions were paying, and we did, I believe it was almost $700,000 adjustment to the budget in 1 year alone to elevate all the pay classes so that they are more in line with our competition. And then that has to continue every year. And the cost of, fuel, cost of paper, the cost of everything for the city has gone up for all of us. And so that's a challenge, and we have to continue to operate the city. And I think with that operation, there's an expectation from our residents that we have a high level of service. And I think what you've presented here in this budget continues that in a wise, fiduciarily good way, if I can make up some words. So a couple things I would like to see us do for consideration. One is when we look at the CIP, particularly noting the Peacock Park, I'd like to rename that to maybe Downtown Park. Because I think the implication that it's a fait accompli that a park will be built there, when frankly I think there's no chance in the world that it will be, as one of the speakers mentioned. That land is, well, I just leave it. Land is not ours, and I'm not sure that the entity that owns it would want to see a park there either. So if we can change it to Downtown Park. But beyond that, I'd like to remove the amount that we have allocated in the CIP to fund that park, remove that, but leave, I don't know what the appropriate amount is, 50,000, 100,000, so that we can begin to explore opportunities to build a park downtown with our stakeholders. Where should it be? What should be included at the park? What should it look like? All of those things need to be explored, because I personally feel that having an opportunity for children to have a respite while they're visiting Williamsburg is good for business. And so I think I'd like to see the notion of a park continue, but I don't want to schedule borrowing money for it today. I don't think that's a wise decision. And so if we're looking at, if we're cutting the CIP by that much, perhaps we can look at adjusting admission tax to maybe 5%. And had a conversation with Ms. Ramsey today, and she's going to be better prepared to talk maybe about the different classifications of taxes. But I think we ought to be cognizant that Williamsburg does do a lot of business with charitable organizations, and that business, Let Freedom Ring Foundation comes to mind. They have a big gala every year, and it's hosted at the Lodge. And the Let Freedom Ring folks do a lot of good work for the community. They're perpetuating a conversation that I think is important, and I don't want to do harm to an organization like that. So I understand that there's different classifications, and so as we move forward in our budget process and we look at admission taxes, maybe there'll be different schedule of admission taxes that we can charge for different organizations, but do it in a fair way. You know, in terms of room and meals tax, I have heard from some restaurateurs, surprisingly, that own real estate, that have suggested that they would rather see us raise real estate rates, tax rates, rather than the tax on a meal. Now, I've heard some other restaurateurs say the opposite. But as you pointed out, Mr. City Manager, you know, a penny in our tax rate only generates $329,000 just to cover the cost of what the school has asked us, has requested of us, which is $1.4 million. That's, you know, 4.5 pennies. Off the top of my head, I could have done the math, but so it would be a lot of pennies just to meet the school's request of us. And I think looking at these excise tax is an appropriate step to do that. You know, one could argue both sides of the table on if it's appropriate or not. Does it hurt business? And I was in the retail business all of my life up until about 5 years ago, and so I'm very keenly understand the impact of certainly occupancy taxes as a hotelier. So all that said, I think we're heading in the right direction. We've demonstrated some significant cuts here in the way that we do business at the city, and I think that's appropriate. Adjusting the CIP, removing lots of items that were frankly some of the goals that we had set for the city based on our conversations with the public. But I think now's the time that we hold back on some of those spendings. And so I appreciate that. But going back to utilities, I'm sorry if I'm cannibalizing too much time. One of the charts showed where we had stopped raising rates. And I'll admit, I was on council when we stopped raising water rates. But that was at the same time that we raised real estate rates. And so I think we wanted to offer a reprieve for our residents, not to ding them twice, but we kind of got stuck in that. But I know amongst conversations with different councils, we didn't raise that water rate, not because we weren't aware of the issues that we had. We saw an escalation in real estate values, which were impacting our residents in their pockets. And so we held steady on water. But we just can't do it anymore. And so if you look at the chart, you know, had we just continued on that natural progression, we would be at the same, ultimately be at the same rate that we are proposing to go to today. And so, you know, it's still a great deal relative to what others in other jurisdictions are having. So I support that. I also liked spreading out the financing of the repairs that need to be done, because what we might find as we move through repairs is there may be a pay-go opportunity. We may be able to pay for some of the things that need to be done with our current funds in our utility fund without having to go to borrow. And I think that is a possibility, and I think that's one that we should explore. Anything you would like to say, Mr. Vice Mayor?
I think you said it all. Thank you to all the city staff for the work that went into presenting this proposed budget to us. Having been a city employee and on the other side, I realize the work that goes into it, and, you know, trying to manage departments on limited funding, and then we see these economic times that become more challenging, and you have to even reduce your expenses even more. So I can certainly appreciate that, and thanks to everyone that's spoke today or either reached out to us through email to share your concerns about spending or the children's park, and continue to contact us if you have thoughts and ideas about how we move forward with the budget. I do agree with the mayor. On the children's park, I'm not in a position where I would support borrowing that money right now with the uncertainty of the future of our financial situation. that I could support borrowing that money right now. Regardless, I think there's a lot of work that needs to go in on location, whether the community supports a park, they don't support a park, but just, there's a lot more work that needs to go into that before we go out and borrow $6.5 million or whatever the figure may end up being for a children's park. I also think this is a time where, if you look through the CIP project, the operational budget, I think the department heads, the city manager, finance, they've done a good job of tightening the belt on the operational needs. So if you start looking at CIP projects, as the city manager mentioned in his presentation, not everything's a building project. There's a lot of projects in there that are replacing police department radios or MDTs or equipment for all the departments that if you really look at that and we start putting those kind of things off, we're going to end up where we ended up with the utility rate. We're going to be trying to play catch up all at one time. So some of those things, in my opinion, we have to do. And there's some projects in there that, as a council, we need to consider before we approve this budget, if now's the right time to continue those projects. And I say this all the time, we have a goals, initiatives, and outcome retreat, and we set those GIOs for the future. But as far as I'm concerned, that's a concept, it's things we want to work toward that we think benefit Williamsburg. But if the timing's not right, I'm not opposed to putting that project aside until a future time. I did have a question, Mr. Trivett. We discussed earlier today the African American Heritage Trail. There's some money set aside in FY26 for a sculpture at the trailhead. The possibility of us really getting to the point where that sculpture would be constructed during this budget, where do you put that on the scale of?
Sure. As far as timing goes, I do think that's possible. The Public Arts Council has been working on an RFP to solicit designs for that piece. And so that's ready to go, I believe. I've asked them to wait till the budget's adopted, particularly to see if the money is included before we proceed with the RFP. But it's in there for FY26. That money is separate from the money to actually build the trail, which is also included in the plan. So certainly you could decide you don't want to finance the art this year, and that would free up some money in the capital plan.
I just put that out there as one of the areas where we could consider pushing that out a little bit further to free up some additional funds in the CIP. I think I agree that with the other additional taxes, not placing the burden on the 4,000, whatever, Carolyn, 4,233 households, gets us the additional revenue in some really tight times. But I think more importantly, as Mr. Trivett pointed out, it sets us up for the future, again, of not placing all that tax burden on our citizens, and having to raise real estate tax, which is not going to get us the amount of revenue that we could gain. And I'm certainly open to looking at admission tax and adjusting that. It's new to us, so we don't know all the ins and outs, but if we need to make adjustments to make that work. And really, the prediction on the revenue from that is an educated guess because we've never had that tax before. So we're all going to continue to look at the budget as we move forward before adoption. So again, I just encourage everyone, if you have thoughts or ideas about areas that you think, we need to look at, please reach out to us and let us know so we can continue to work on this as we move towards a May adoption. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And yes, thank you to the city manager and the staff for putting all this together. It seems to me that putting together a budget is not easy in even simple times and normal times. And I think that from what we can hear and that we feel when we're together and in our community and our groups talking, that there is just a really heightened level of uncertainty from one day to the next, kind of what the economic picture may be. And so I just want to say that I think it's important for everybody to know that's not lost on anyone up here. That, you know, we can just kind of put our blinders on and be like, well, we live in Williamsburg, so it's all going to work out fine. You know, I think, you know, we have a pride of place here because it is a pretty extraordinary place to live and we're really lucky to be here. But never for a moment take for granted that we are, you know, immune to forces that are beyond our control. So I just want to say that because hearing a lot of, you know, the comments and emails, like the anxiety that we, I think, feel, some maybe more than others, and that's okay, right? That's fine. But it is important, I think, to say clearly that everyone up here and everyone in the city staff is doing this every single day to make sure that the future of Williamsburg is better than the present. And so as we move forward in a spirit of togetherness, right? And in a spirit of like we are all rowing in the same direction. We may have different ideas about how to get there, right? But we're all moving in the same direction in the spirit of having a community that we're all proud of and that our children will be thrilled to be here too. So in that, and with that said, you know, I think for me, for right now, just on a couple of particular points, I agree with the mayor, and I think, given the moving parts of the park proposal, where it is and what it looks like, and what should it be and where should it be, there is a lot of community discussion, and I actually think that the amount of community discussion that has been generated over the last month or however long it's been about the park has been extraordinarily healthy. Like, I actually think that this is how it should be, that an idea is proposed and it's out there, and then there are people who come forward and say this is the best idea I've ever heard, and some people say, no, I don't, like, I want to talk about that more. Like, you know, that may be hard sometimes, but actually what's been going on here with respect to the children's park, I actually think has been pretty great, because we've heard from a lot of different people, a lot of different ideas about here's what I like and here's what I want to change, and what I see from where I'm sitting is like there is a lot of space of compromise. And so we should give that time to develop, and we should give that time to move forward. And I agree then with not, you know, we don't need to borrow money right now in order to have that dialogue continue, because at the end of the day, what we want is something that's going to be great for our community and everyone's going to be happy about it. Even if not everybody gets everything they want, right? We all feel proud of the process. So I think, you know, given that there are a lot of moving parts and conversations to be had, not borrowing at this time does make sense. With respect to the water and utility fund, I think, you know, again, the mayor kind of took the words out of my mouth, you know, looking back at, you know, I wrote down, I was like, who was on council in 2018? And then he goes, I was here in 2018. So I was like, oh, okay. No, but the point is that, you know, that is something that this is caught up to us, and we just have to deal with it. You know, we cannot continue to kick this can down the road. That would be irresponsible. So here we are. And I think that the proposal as it is makes sense. We see why we are where we are. This isn't a mystery. We're here because we haven't had the step-up increases over the years that we had in the past. So this is something that is to be corrected, and we know why we're doing it, and we know how that money needs to be spent, and that actually makes a lot of sense to me. So I think that, like, this is something that I'm really glad that we are looking at in this way. And then I think for one other thing I want to just highlight and point out is the importance, and I think something is a priority, is providing the funding requested by the schools. And I think that as we move forward, that is something I think that to be highlighted, this is an increase. And for those of you who have or haven't been sort of tracking the request of the school division, they looked at their budget and submitted a budget this year to the funding partners. And, you know, I think that as a city, you know, we look at that and we fully funding their requests. And I think that is something that we want to not lose. I think that is an extremely important part of our community that we need to be taking very seriously. And I think that this proposed budget does reflect that. I think, though, really for today, what I want, aside from those points that I've made, is to just land on, over the next few weeks, this is what this is for, is to have these conversations. And I, for one, will be looking more at specific things to see, like there have been a lot of cuts proposed, like what else can we look at and should we be looking at? And I do invite members of the community to engage in that conversation. Because I certainly don't have all the answers today, nobody does, but I think if we move forward over the next month, like having these talks about what's working and what's not, and what can we change, kind of, in the spirit of the emissions tax, what might that look like? Why do it this way than that way? I look forward to those conversations as we make this the best budget that it can be, given where we are right now. So thank you.
Ms. Ramsey?
So I'm going to try and pick a few things that all of you said, and it probably won't be in any particular order. I'll probably start with the utility fund, and for me, the one word that sort of pops to mind as to why we need to do this is Richmond. I don't think any of us would want to encounter the issues that they had, I guess, in January, and I think it's a smart way to do the improvements such that the spending is measured by what can be done each year. So I'm good with that. As far as the CIP, I think, like the Vice Mayor mentioned, one particular project, the African American Heritage Trail, we've been working on this for a number of years, and so do we say, okay, we put all of it aside, or do we try to do the trail but not have the memorial at the trailhead? And a lot can still be accomplished with having the trail, particularly since we've worked so hard, and particularly Michelle, with the narrative and the federal grants and the money that we have already received. We can do a lot with that, and what we have budgeted, move it forward, even if we can't do it to 100% completion. And I'd also like to piggyback on what the Vice Mayor said as far as what's included in the CIP. A lot of people think it's just buildings, but if we look at the items, there's a lot of maintenance issues, HVACs, roofs. Some things are contractual, some are mandated. The biggest categories are public safety, whether it be vehicles, equipment. I looked back at 10 years ago of GIOs, and I think that's another thing we need to remember, is that, as Mr. Trivett said, the budget is a plan, and it's a plan for us to try to accomplish the GIOs, which are in turn the roadmap or the strategic plan for the city. So until I joined City Council, I had no idea how those two were connected, and it's something I try to remember. But I look back to GIOs from 10 years ago, 2015 and 16, even before I joined City Council, and a lot of the same things were listed there that we are still trying to accomplish today. I mean, one thing that came to mind, particularly with the weather out there, is bus stops, where, people waiting for buses and having no shelter, no seat, standing in the rain. That was an item that was on the CIP from 2015-16. It's one that we have on ours, and from my conversations with the city manager, we'll try to do a couple of them, but not get anywhere near what we would like to accomplish for all of those residents and all of those people who use public transportation. I think it's also important to remember that, and other things that were on there, the Blayton Building was on there 10 years ago, and they hope to have a redevelopment site a plan determined by spring of 2015. Well, we had hoped to use ARPA funds that we set aside particularly for the redevelopment of the Blayton Building. That was the housing project that we hoped to help out. And so we will delay that a bit longer. Sidewalks. Everyone wants a sidewalk in their neighborhood, but we know the high cost of those, and I'm sure those people who have patiently waited for sidewalks will wait patiently a little longer, or have to. So it's just to say that I think over the years we have really tried as a group, and I've been on council almost as, well, not quite as long as the mayor, but we work together to identify projects that do make Williamsburg better, but are recognize that we can't do everything at once. And I think we also do need to remember, as Stacy said, what a special place that we have here in Williamsburg. I think we take it for granted. I was with someone this morning who said, you know, you come back to Williamsburg from visiting Washington, D.C., or Austin, Texas, or Houston, Texas, where I was, and it's like, whew, I'm home. You know, we have a very, very clean city. We have a safe city. We do a lot of things and have a lot of special services because of who we are, what we are, and who we attract. It's not just the residents. We have a far broader reach than really anyone that can be identified for the size city we have. And so thinking about that broad reach brings me to the excise taxes that we've talked about. And I don't like them any better than anybody else. But from looking at our options, it not only helps us meet our revenue needs, particularly for the schools, that's the driver, and we have not only a contractual but a moral obligation to fully fund the schools, but also to continue funding and investment in institutions and organizations that do make Williamsburg what it is, and to continue providing assistance to those in needs. We talk about, you know, the tourism fund needs that we have, but also through our Social Services Advisory Board. And one thing that we haven't talked about yet, but was the presentation that was given to us, was it just last month, for CDR and the Child Development Resources. I think all of us feel that that's a very worthy cause. And personally, I'd like to find some way to squeeze a little bit out of the budget so that we can help them in some regard there. I was on City Council when the last time we talked about an admissions tax, and a lot has changed in those 6 years, I think. At the time, it was hard-pressed to come up with 4 or 5 entities that you might be charging an admission tax for. And just off of the top of my head, I listed all of the different things that occur in the city now and came up with over 20. You know, a lot of things that we have helped promote, whether it be the Cat Festival or the Comic Festival or the Turkey Trots or craft beer festivals or road races and jazz festivals. So the breadth and depth of entities to which an admission tax would be charged, it's a mouthful, is a lot broader than I think what people might expect. I agree with the mayor that I think it's important not to overburden one group. And so I reached out to the city attorney to try and get a little more clarity, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to think about this. There are different tax classes: charitable events, school-sponsored events, museums, sporting events, and different rates can be applied to different organizations or tax rates. One thing that I found of interest is that you can tax only a portion. So the galas that we talked about, the Let Freedom Ring, I think, you know, we might want to look at charging it differently than some of the other things, what the normal cost of a ticket is, what other municipalities do. Norfolk calls theirs a amusement and entertainment tax. And so I would like to see us over the next few weeks explore what our options are and what makes sense to take into account the different tax classes and how they apply to Williamsburg, particularly with the nonprofits. So anyway.
Ms. Williams?
Yes, well, there's been a lot discussed today in regards to the budget, so I would just like to conclude with some remarks furthering just our discussion today. First, I would like to thank Mr. Trivett and also the city staff for compiling this budget. I know it is a tedious task every year, especially given this year's circumstances, so thank you for the countless hours that you all spent composing this budget this year. I believe as a city that we have a moral obligation to conduct ourselves in a fiscally responsible manner. And I think when we think about being fiscally responsible, it really opens up the opportunity for discussion, not just between us here on council, but also in the community as well, and shaping, especially with the circumstances right now, of what do we want to see Williamsburg look like, not just this year, but also setting ourselves up for success in the following years as well. And with that being said, I believe that despite the uncertain circumstances now, it presents us with a special opportunity to have this dialogue, have this discourse of really what is the Williamsburg that we would like to see. I guess I'll just take it line by line. In regards to the park, I think that going back to being fiscally responsible, that placing the borrowing off off a year would be best for the current situation we find ourselves in. Currently, in regards to utilities, Ms. Ramsey brought up a wonderful point of making sure that what happened in Richmond does not, there's no opportunity for that to occur here. So taking the necessary steps now to set us up for, like I said earlier, the Williamsburg that we would like to see years to come. In regards to taxes, Ms. Ramsey also pointed out that we can shape, or we can have the discussion to shape what we would like to see the taxes look like. So in regards to looking at the different tax classes and the different rates we can apply there as well. So I'll conclude saying that, let's have these discussions either at the meetings, through outside meetings, outside of council, through emails as well, of what we want to see Williamsburg look like as we proceed in the future. So, thank you.
Ms. Williams. Any other thoughts? Well, Ms. Trivett, I think you got some stuff to work on, and perhaps Thursday you can come back with some stuff. I recognize that looking at the different classifications for admission tax may take a while, so we won't press you to have something by Thursday, but certainly by May's work session, maybe we can have some information on that. But that said, council could approve a rate in May, but this tax wouldn't go into effect until July. So in June, essentially, we could do a budget amendment in
It'd actually be January.
January.
Yes.
So we have time, thank you for that. So we have several months that we could lock down what the rates could be on that.
I think we can have some clarity certainly by May. What we'll do between now and Thursday is look at what you all have said and make some adjustments, and hopefully have some new projections on Thursday prior to the public hearing so that you can see what that looks like based on what you've said, because most of you were pretty much in consensus on some changes, so we can make those. As it relates to admissions tax, what we will do between now and Thursday, we'll begin to look at some of those things, particularly how other localities are setting those classifications. But I think more importantly, we'll look at our revenue estimate, which really is what we're focused on, right? How we get to that number we can work out over time, but that revenue estimate will back that down by at least half based on your comments, and look at the CIP and try to come up with some suggestions on how we might get there. Some of you have suggested some things that'll get us most of the way there, if not all the way, so that's what we'll do between now and Thursday.
And if we have particular line items from the CIP, should we just email them
Absolutely.
to you
Absolutely.
and Barbara together?
Please do.
Mr. Dent?
I did overlook one question that I had written down. Will we know what our what the funding partners in the library will we have an answer to that before we're expected to approve of?
My honest answer is I doubt it. I don't think we'll have an answer. Certainly, I think we already now have an indication. And I think that, that's one of the challenges with the library project is the budget includes $20 million as the city share. The bid that we have, which is part of the packet for Thursday, is for $26 million. And so if the city is the only entity putting money in, based on the budget that you're considering, we don't have enough for it. So the city council is going to have to consider what to do about that. My suggestion is that you go through the process that you've already outlined and get a more accurate estimate from the builder, and then we can decide how to address what will likely be a financial shortfall for the project. Hopefully by then, a few months from now, we will have better clarity on a couple of the questions, primarily what will the counties be able to contribute, if anything, and also an answer from the library itself about how what's planned at the James City County Government Center impacts what you might consider doing downtown. And that's not a question I can answer, that's a question for the library staff.
And the library was also on here, begin spring 2016, as far as assessments for a new library. So it's been a long time coming.
Okay, good. Anything else?
No.
All right, we'll move on then. Next is city council communications. Does anybody have anything to share? No? You all see on the agenda, meetings for various boards and commissions through May 6th. So hope that you take a look at that, and if there's anything you'd like to participate in, please show up and do that. Leads us now to the next open forum. If anybody would like to come up. You can finish page 5. Welcome back, Ms. Murphy.
This is sort of not the budget, but the transparency part. I would like to discuss transparency, and I'm encouraged by what you said today about getting public comment on the budget and other things, and this has been my experience. First, public engagement and participation needs to be two ways. If citizens takes the time to write letters or emails or come to a meeting giving staff or council their comments and questions, they deserve a response that they received it with answers to their questions or concerns. Taking the time to answer questions at the next meeting or at a different meeting or in writing or by a call should be a part of staff's responsibility or in council's responsibility. Most professional organizations extol the virtues of meaningful participation. Public service is in part about addressing the needs and concerns of residents. The current lack of effective two-way communication is frustrating for those who take the time to offer up comments and emails. The frustration is palatable and very noticeable to those who make those efforts. Having one's questions go unanswered and ignored leads to mistrust, and that's very disconcerting to me. I am perplexed as to why public forums on the budget are not part of the approval process, and it has been done in our neighboring communities, and it would be well worth the small investment in time. Thanks for your time, and I hope you will dive deep into the budget, evaluate it, and find additional opportunities to shrink the budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? I'll close the open forum. Oh, I'm sorry, please. I'll reopen it. Sorry.
Well, my name is Ryan. I'm at 34 Claiborne, so just right on the line there. I'm not completely conversant with a lot of these details of a lot of the specifics, but listening today to a lot of what's being discussed, I've got just three points that I'll keep to that I think might be fruitful in terms of a framework. If there's a need to try to find additional revenue from existing properties, but there's a conflict between homeowners and everything else, given how much overdevelopment there's been of commercial properties in the greater Williamsburg area and in the city in particular, has there been any thought to maybe having some version of a tax penalty or a negative tax benefit to commercial properties that are less than 15 years old that have been vacant for more than a year? In terms of if the landlord is holding out for a rent that local businesses or any businesses would find unreasonable, if they keep the properties empty, that doesn't really benefit in terms of local employment, even if the nominal rate from the property is kept. That was a question I had. I'm not sure if that has already been looked at and answered. but just thinking in terms of numbers, I understand that college endowments are tax exempt, however. I believe the current William and Mary endowment is somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.45 billion. 0.1% of that, in some way, shape, or form, could be collected for local use. That entirely fund K through 12, even if it were completely independent for Williamsburg City. I'm not sure that there's, some sort of immediate legal workaround to that, but maybe, and if an appeal could be made to President Roche, he could appeal to the Board of Trustees and see what they have to say. Certainly, as a public institution, you couldn't make the claim that that money's being taken away from education. A technical question I had in terms of the admission tax. If there were some way, and again, I don't have the technical details and I'm not clear on the legalities of this, but if it were possible, as long as it could be done at minimal expense, if the city website could have some sort of portal, even if that just links to third parties for ticket sales, that could explain the admission tax so that people looking for tickets for local events, whether it's anything from the choral group to the field days or whatever it might be, there could be a sort of a clearinghouse, even if just in the sense of public information. Last thing that I thought of with the discussions today was in terms of the children's park itself. Again, I'm coming to this late, so I'm not sure if these questions have already been asked and answered. But is there a reason, even if the location makes sense, and even if, for what you were saying, the purpose of it, to have a respite for children, to have some place for just people in general to sit in some shade while they're frequenting the businesses, would it have to necessarily be a high upfront capital expenditure that would involve pneumatics, that would involve high insurance, that would involve ongoing maintenance costs? Could it be a community food garden with tarping to provide shade, with outreach to local chef owners or just chefs in general in the community that would be able to provide on some sort of even ad hoc basis that they would have demonstrations for raising vegetables, tending gardens, preparing food? There could be activities there that children could participate in. I think it would alleviate the noise complaints. I think it would alleviate what's probably sure to be a very hectic ambulance route. And I don't see a lot of land use conflict there. It would be scalable in terms of money, and it would be in the same area if that were amenable to all parties. And if it didn't work out, it could be reversed within a matter of weeks without any real change to the land. Just a zoning question. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else? Seeing none, I'll close the open forum, and I believe we have closed session, Mr. Vice Mayor.
I move to go into closed session pursuant to Section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of discussing one personnel matter per subparagraph 1 concerning appointments to boards and commissions, and 3 property matters per subparagraph 3 regarding acquisition of property of which discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect bargaining or negotiating strategy of a public body, and or the disposition of surplus property of which discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect bargaining position or negotiating strategy of a public body.
Second?
Ms. McKay?
Ms. Williams?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Ms. Kernshire?
Aye.
Okay, we'll go into closed session and return shortly thereafter. Mr. Vice Mayor?
I move to approve certification of a closed session pursuant to Section 2.2-3712 of the Code of Virginia.
Second?
Okay, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Williams?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Ms. Kern Chair?
Aye.
If there's no other business before council, would somebody make a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Ms. McKay?
Ms. Williams?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Ms. Kern Chair?
Aye.
We are adjourned.